my friends. Welcome to today's episode of Stand Up, where I have the great David Rothkopf joining me again to talk about how consequential it is that a ChristoFascist, Mike Johnson, has become the Speaker of the House. And we, of course, talk about what is happening vis-a-vis Israel and the Palestinians, protests on college campuses, and more. That begins at about 14 minutes in after a news recap. And thank you very much for all your birthday wishes. It is my birthday today, October 31st. Happy Halloween to those who celebrate, and who doesn't? Come on, get after it today, tonight, whatever you're doing. Dress it up, going trick-or-treating with the kids, opening the door, giving out all of your candy. Make sure you give out all the candy. As it gets late, just start dumping it out. Just keep a couple pieces just in case you get any stragglers. You don't want any left over for you. You'll end up eating all that, so get rid of it. But what an amazing holiday. I loved it growing up. I loved it when my girls were growing up. I still love it. I miss being out there knocking on doors. I was thinking about going to this awesome neighborhood near mine. You know, everybody always has that one neighborhood where it's awesome to go to, best to go to on Halloween, safest, best candy, everybody's cool. And we have that here. Everybody does. And I was thinking about going over there alone without any kids. And I realized that would probably be weird. I just love Halloween. I love watching everybody and seeing it all happen. I mean, nobody's going to notice that I'm alone, right? Everybody's just going to think my costume is creepy, bald, white, now 48-year-old guy. Yeah. Okay, I won't. All right, stop. I won't go out alone. Well, I hope you have a great Halloween, and I hope you have a great last day of October. Also, happy birthday to Bill B in D.C., Bill Boyle, and Tina Winsett, both celebrating their birthdays yesterday. We have such an amazing community here at Stand Up. Hard to believe that we're entering the 4th year of the podcast. I got a fun email from a listener yesterday who said he has been listening to the show since day one, and he absolutely loves the fact that every morning he doesn't know who is going to be the guest. He says it's like Christmas morning every day, seeing who you have as a guest. Thank you to D. Connolly, whoever you are. I really appreciate that message. Today's is David Rothkopf, and I think you're really going to love it, as always. People love Rothkopf. Still getting email messages and thoughts on my conversation with Michael Cohen from last week that was over an hour and a half and got argumentative but never ugly. But I got an email from my friend Mary yesterday who said that she listened to the complete interview with Michael Cohen last week, and she agrees with everything that he talked about, and said, I want to explain to you firsthand how it feels growing up like Jewish in New York. When Michael told you that you have no idea what it's like to being a Jew, it hit home. I grew up in East Flatbush, Brooklyn. My parents were liberals and felt everyone needed to get along. I lived in a neighborhood where we were the only Jewish family until I was 16. Your conversation and how you feel about what is going on in Israel brought back truly traumatic memories of mine. I had to deal with kids screaming, Hitler missed one, and throwing pennies at me as I walked home from school. By your conversation with Michael, you truly do not understand the issue. No one wants to see innocent children killed, but Israel needs to do everything they can to eradicate Hamas. She also went on to say that she recommends I visit Israel. Maybe then I would look at the situation differently. We follow the politics in Israel and don't like Netanyahu and his policies towards the Palestinians. We just feel that Israel has to exist. The Jews need a place where we feel safe. When we were in Israel, I actually felt safer than home here in New York. I just want to let you know, as an American Jew, how I feel. Buying blue and white bagels is not supporting Israel. The current conflict is bringing out even more anti-Semitism, and so much sympathy and support for the Palestinians is upsetting. There's too much hatred in the world, and I don't have any answers, but I am frightened by the rise of anti-Semitism for myself and my grandchildren. Well, Mary, thank you very much for your very honest and vulnerable email. I really appreciate you listening, your open mind, and hopefully you will continue to listen and support all of the different conversations that we're having here as you have, and look forward to hearing from more of you on that and anything else that you're hearing on this podcast each and every day. Also, someone reached out, I don't want to say who, but I appreciate it, and said, you should plug your Venmo for your birthday. Okay. Pete-Dominic, last 4 digits, 8844. If you want to make a one-time gift donation, maybe you haven't, for whatever reason, subscribed to the show, sure. Happy birthday, Pete-Dominic on Venmo. Okay, there you go. Thank you. To the person who suggested that, she knows who she is. Also, not sure I will be posting a show Wednesday because I'm going to take today off. It is my birthday. As you know, I tape the show the day before, the evening before, and post it late, getting all the latest, most relevant news out to you, along with a conversation with a brilliant expert. I have something in the can that I might post, an interview with me that my friend Mark Nolte did with me. So I might get to that, but I'm a little shy still about sharing that. But it might be a fun thing to post on my birthday. Otherwise, I'm going to take the whole day off. Just a heads up on that for tomorrow, the Wednesday program. All right, a couple things I want to mention and play for you. And, well, the big news outside of the continued siege on Gaza by Israeli forces moving deeper in is about the auto workers, the UAW. Huge news. This is a really big deal. General Motors yesterday became the last of the three large U.S. automakers to reach a tentative agreement on a new contract with the United Automobile Workers Union, setting the stage for an end to the union's 6-week wave of strikes. Like the contract it hammered out with Ford and Stellantis, the tentative deal with GM would lift the top UAW wage from $32 an hour to more than $40 over 4.5 years. That would allow employees working 40 hours a week to earn about $84,000 a year. Kind of hard to believe they weren't already earning that with the type of work that they do, but big news. Let's head over to Phil LeBeau, he covers the automobile industry for CNBC.
A tentative deal to end a nearly 6-week strike with the automaker. Phil LeBeau joins us this morning with all of the details that have been coming out overnight. Good morning.
Good morning, Andrew. This is a deal that came together. The final push was this week after the UAW called out a couple of strikes, one at Stellantis, one at GM, at some very profitable plants. Ford looked around and said, we're reporting earnings on Thursday. They're going to be strong. We want to be next in line for another strike. They finalized the deal. Tentative agreement calls for a 25% pay hike over the next 4.5 years. Goes over 30% when you add in cost of living adjustments. They're also reducing the number of wage tiers, a big push by the UAW. And there's more profit sharing for retirees. Here's UAW President Shawn Fain talking with the membership last night on Facebook.
We send this contract to you because we know it breaks records. We know it will change lives. But what happens next is up to you all.
All right, so what is next for the UAW members who have been on strike? Some of them have been on strike since September 15th. They will go back to work soon. Exactly when remains to be seen, but they're not going to wait until it's finalized. The contract is ratified. The details will be spelled out for the membership on Sunday, and the ratification vote will take place after that. That remains to be seen. Likely in the next week and a half, you will see them do some type of ratification vote. But again, the important part here is that they will go back to work soon, a matter of days, not waiting until it's finalized, whether that's a week and a half from now.
All right, CNBC analysis and huge news coming out of the UAW. Great news for working folks, and especially all those members of the UAW and those non-union automobile manufacturers that are going to probably get a bump in their pay as well. The other big story from Monday, to me, what I'm seeing, my opinion, big story, is that the House of Representatives under the Republican leadership, their new Christo-fascist leader, Mike Johnson, who I talk with David Rothkopf all about, well, they introduced a plan to provide $14.3 billion in aid to Israel. Okay, that's interesting. Nothing. They've decoupled the aid to Ukraine. And, oh, wait, the aid is going to come at the cost of cutting funding for the Internal Revenue Service that they absolutely hate, Republicans. So now that's going to set up a showdown with Democrats who control the Senate. It's not going to go anywhere. But in one of the first major policy actions under the new House Speaker, Mike Johnson, they unveiled a standalone supplemental spending bill for Israel and a handout to wealthy folks that will not be under the scrutiny of the defunded IRS. Our friend Maura Quint, who was on the show yesterday, who is, of course, a campaign chair at the Americans for Tax Fairness and Tax the Rich, is all over this. She says over on Blue Sky, she writes, the GOP is proposing an aid package to Israel that is paid for by cutting IRS funding. IRS funding that lets the IRS pursue rich tax cheats. Cutting IRS funding costs us money. No matter what the issue, the GOP has one focus and aim only. Protect the rich. That's it. That's their only mission. I don't know if that's their only mission, but it certainly seems to be their primary mission. Good stuff from Mara. And here is Jake Tapper with Mike Johnson, where the CNN anchor repeatedly pressed the right-wing congressman on the zombie claim, the myth that Democrats were funding 87,000 IRS agents to go after average Americans.
You supported the House bill we just discussed. It would rescind billions of dollars in funding for the IRS. Before the vote, you tweeted, "Tonight, House GOP will fulfill our promise and vote to block the Biden administration from unleashing 87,000 new IRS agents to go after families and small businesses." That's not accurate. It's 87,000 IRS employees, not IRS agents. It would be over the course of, I think, of a decade, some of them replacing individuals who lose their jobs through attrition. And the Congressional Budget Office says that your bill to get rid of those IRS employees is going to add to the deficit.
Only in the bizarro world of Washington would you get a CBO estimate that says not spending $80 billion is actually going to add to the deficit. It makes no sense.
Because of enforcement for people who are avoiding paying their taxes. As you know, about 10 years ago, if you made more than $10 million a year, 1 out of 5 people like that would be audited. Now it's down to like 3.5, 3.6%. The really wealthy people are getting away with not paying their taxes, corporations too.
The intent of hiring all these new agents would have the effect of going after hardworking families and small businesses. That is not a Republican talking point. That comes from the Joint Committee on Taxation, which is a nonpartisan group. They've evaluated this, and they know that it will be the low-hanging fruit that the IRS will go after first, and that's the small business owners and those who are struggling to be entrepreneurs and job creators. And they're the risk takers in our economy who provide jobs for more people. They are not the ones that need scrutiny. What we want, Jake, the Republican Party wants, is an IRS that works for hardworking families, not against them. And that's what this was going to be about, and that's why we fulfilled our commitment to repeal that funding on the very first day. I'm glad we did, and I think if you poll this across the country, I think most of America agrees with us.
Well, it depends on what you're presenting in the poll. Are you saying 87,000 agents are coming at you, booga booga, or is it there's funding for IRS enforcement, 87,000 people over the course of a decade? They would be focused on going after individuals who don't pay their taxes, mainly wealthy people and corporations. I think you'd probably get 2 different answers.
Well, maybe, but when the Joint Committee on Taxation publishes something and presents it, it's given a lot of weight because, again, they're nonpartisan. This is not Republican talking points. This is what the evaluation and the analysis of the White House's proposal and the legislation last year, what it would actually accomplish. And so we disagree with that. We have a different agenda, and I think it's the agenda of the American people.
But I quoted the CBO, and you went after them. They're nonpartisan, too.
Listen, the CBO doesn't have a lot of credibility here right now. Their analysis is wildly inaccurate in a lot of ways, and they don't always do appropriate analysis. And look.
All right, well, there's a sampling of the dishonesty of Mike Johnson, the new Speaker of the House, and that's just on economics. I mean, forget about democracy and religion and everything else where this guy's an extremist. We'll talk more about him with David Rothkopf coming up. Those are the 2 big stories that I was following yesterday. Obviously, there's a lot more news out there, including this headline that I saw. Scientists reveal exactly what killed the dinosaurs. What is this? Scientists announced Monday it was not the asteroid impact that killed off dinosaurs 66 million years ago, but debris ejected playing a critical role. A statement comes from a team led by the Royal Observatory of Belgium, which determined dust from pulverized rock was thrown into Earth's atmosphere, blocking the sun and hindering the photosynthesis of plants. Okay, all right. Well, that sounds pretty ominous and terrible, but that is a new announcement coming from a whole bunch of scientists, and I don't know how accurate it is, but I saw that headline. I thought it would be a fun last thing to say before we get to my conversation with David Rothkopf, who is definitely one of my favorite guests to talk to on the program. Of course, he's a columnist at the Daily Beast. He is the CEO of the Rothkopf Group, a media company that produces podcasts, including Deep State Radio, which he hosts. He's also the author of several books, including most recently American Resistance, the inside story of how the deep state saved the nation, which is very, very good. Follow him on social media, as always. Let's do it right now with my very special guest. Always love it, David Rothkopf. There he is. David Rothkopf is joining us, and we're always happy to see you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. The paychecks that I get for each of these appearances are funding a new addition here to my home.
Maybe it could just pay you in honey. We have a listener who's a big fan who would like to send you a jar of his homemade honey. Would you like that? Would you like some honey from a listener?
Yeah. Yes. Isn't it funny how a bear likes honey? Yes.
All right. We'll make sure that you get some from Kevin Richburg. There you go, Kevin. All right. Well, I've got to talk to you about several issues as always, but I wanted to ask you about what we are seeing happening on college campuses over the past, say, week or so. The Biden administration unveiling new actions today. I don't know if that'll do anything, but to combat anti-Semitism on college campuses after a, quote, alarming uptick in incidents since the Israeli-Hamas war started in early October. My question to you is, how do you see this happening on college campuses? How do you see what's happening? Is it a few campuses? Is it nationwide? How extensive or widespread, and how terrifying is it?
I think it's complicated.
Yeah.
I think there's clearly a lot of anti-Semitism out there. There are clearly a lot of people who are out of control. The incident that took place at Cooper Union, the incident that took place at Cornell, the letters that were sent out by folks at Harvard, there have been a number of such incidents where people have taken positions either in defense of Hamas terrorists, or they have taken positions that are just hateful to Jews. And, that's got to stop. The administration is focused on it. I think everybody should be deeply troubled by how close to the surface all this was.
Yeah.
That, it's taken only a few events in a few weeks for this to not just break out across the U.S., but around the world. There was a pogrom in Dagestan, people at the airport charging towards an airplane because it had come in from Israel. They heard there were Jews on it, going through hotels, looking to find the Jews. These are the kind of attacks on Jews that led many, many people to leave Russia, come to the United States 100 years ago. And so this deep-seated prejudice is something that we have to take much more seriously than we've been taking it in the past. Having said that, there's plenty of anti-Semitism to go around. We don't have to invent it where it doesn't exist.
Right.
And so criticizing the Israeli government is not anti-Semitic. Seeking safety for Palestinian children is not anti-Semitic. Even questioning the premise that Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state, no matter what the consequences are for others who live there, is not anti-Semitic, because everywhere we look, we have to respect human rights. And I think on a lot of campuses, there's a lot of Israeli history of abuse of human rights that it's fair to bring up in these conversations. It's led to a lot of sympathy for the Palestinians.
Right.
And there are a lot of people in Israel who say, how dare you bring up history or context? There was a horrible attack here. It doesn't matter what the history is. The attack is indefensible. And I would say the attack is indefensible. But if we're looking forward, we're looking towards solutions. It does matter what the history is.
Sure.
And I think, you get a lot of discussion of that on college campuses. I just saw a tweet moments before I signed on here from somebody on Fox News that said, being socialist is anti-Semitic, which would have come as a big surprise to a lot of the early socialists. But having said that, and frankly, to a lot of the latter socialists, but, it just shows how far this has gone. This has become a kind of cudgel to use against everybody indiscriminately.
Right.
And that's wrong, too.
But as you said, there's plenty to go around. And before the most recent violence in Israel, throughout the Trump administration, we heard all kinds of rhetoric, and we saw violence at synagogues and all kinds of graffiti all the time. And certainly the rhetoric of many of the supporters, and Charlottesville, and so on. And so it's more than enough to go around. It was already at a boiling point for Jewish Americans, and this is different, but it's not as if it wasn't there. It's only progressed, it would seem.
Absolutely right. The shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue just passed its 5th anniversary last week. And I think this is the Pittsburgh synagogue where a number of people were shot. And I think there is latent anti-Semitism in almost every society.
Yes.
But in the past 8, 9 years, 10 years, there have been a number of world leaders, notably Donald Trump, who have sought to harness the anti-Semitism and to give license to the anti-Semitism.
Yes.
Because they thought supporting neo-Nazis, white supremacists, groups that march through Charlottesville chanting "the Jews will not replace us" would give them a political advantage.
Right. And they believe all kinds of global conspiracies that Jews are running. Well, I guess they're running
the world. And Vladimir Putin, anti-Semitic. There are lots of these others out there who've promoted anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. They've given permission. And so, is Donald Trump sort of in the middle of this Israel-Gaza thing? No. But do we have to take into consideration the permission he's given to white supremacists and neo-Nazis to attack Jews as we seek to unravel this problem and to minimize it? Yes, we do. And we should challenge him. We should challenge these others. And it'll be interesting to see whether that happens.
Let's go back to what's going on in Israel right now. I just wanted to ask you also about what's happening in the West Bank. We've mostly been focused on Gaza since the attack in Israel, of course, but there are now 30 Israeli human rights and civil society organizations urging the international community to, quote, act urgently to stop the state-backed wave of settler violence, which has led and is leading to the forcible transfer of Palestinian communities in the West Bank. I read this Times of Israel article that you shared. What's happening in the West Bank as a result of those are Palestinian people with Israeli settlements, and there's violence between them. Is that and it's being apparently, I don't know if it's encouraged, but they're looking away from it, the Israeli government.
It's encouraged. Ben-Gvir, the national security advisor, Itamar Ben-Gvir, presided at an event a couple weeks ago where they were handing out weapons to settlers. He has been pushing forward law changes that would allow, more violence against Palestinians. They have covered up and looked the other way. Hundreds of Palestinians have died in the West Bank over the past couple of years at the hands of settlers. And I think one of the things that's really important for people to recognize is that many, many Israeli Jews are absolutely outraged by this. They are disgusted by the extreme right. They are disgusted by the program to produce more settlements and to displace more Palestinians. They are disgusted by the idea that water or internet or food or hospital supplies would be denied to Gaza, and they see a different path forward. The problem is, and it goes back to this anti-Semitism thing, that we're in such an overheated moment that everything is black or white, and the Israeli right has embraced the idea that any criticism of them will be tarred with the brush of anti-Semitism.
Right.
And frankly, it can't be allowed to go on. It can't be allowed to go on. And I have to say, as a final point here, my old grandma, Jewish grandma from Hungary, would look at events in the world and define them, whether they were good for the Jews or bad for the Jews.
Right.
And the government in Israel right now, bad for the Jews.
That's how I've seen it. That's how I've seen it for a very long time. It seems like a short-term gains, but in the long term, or even in shorter terms, there is all kinds of violence as a result. And furthermore, they make themselves, how do I want to say it? It's not good what they're doing often, because there's a backlash. It's not good for Jewish people when the Israelis are as aggressive as they are in the, quote, form of self-defense. It's not unlike, and we could point to so many American interventions. I always point to Abu Ghraib and Gitmo to be the most obvious ones, simply because that's what terrorists said helped recruit them. Americans' interventions around the world have created a lot of hatred for America, but people will argue, well, we haven't been attacked, right? So I guess that's right.
I hear that all the time.
Yeah.
I hear that all the time. What they don't say is we were never attacked before. There was one attack. That this was very likely a one-off. Joe Biden was absolutely right in his remarks in Israel, and when he got back in his remarks in the United States, to urge us not to make the same mistakes that we made in the wake of 9/11. And when I talk to people who are out there commenting on these things and who are feeling the heat of the moment, they on a regular basis will say this feels like right after 9/11.
Yes.
Where people had incredibly extreme views. And I think it's important to remember that in the wake of 9/11, the United States did something absolutely unforgivable. We invaded another country that had no role in 9/11 for no justifiable reason, and conducted a war there for a decade that resulted in between 600,000 and 800,000 innocent Iraqi deaths. 600,000 and 800,000 innocent Iraqi deaths that should not have taken place and would not, had we not let our imaginations and our ideologies run wild in the wake of 9/11. People use events like these to excuse absolutely indefensible acts. And we need to all stop and say, a crime in response to a crime is not just.
Right. And not to mention a generation of veterans, who many of which are broken, and thousands more dead, Gold Star families, the cost of that war. And it can be compared, some people compare that invasion to Russia's invasion of Ukraine in terms of the why of it all, in terms of what for, in terms of needed violence or wars of choice. And I certainly want to ask you about that. Maybe we can just, as a way of getting into your great piece at the Daily Beast about the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who you refer to and many others refer to as a Christo-fascist, including me. I think that's an apt description. But I wanted to ask you, the big controversy right now in Congress is the funding for Israel and for Ukraine. News broke yesterday. Apparently, the new speaker is going to decouple that. President Biden made that Oval Office speech talking about the need for funding. Mike Johnson wants to decouple it so that, I guess, the Republicans can decide who they stand with. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a terrible mistake. I think it plays directly into the hands of Vladimir Putin. It sends yet again the message that the Republican Party in the United States is dominated by a pro-Putin caucus that absolutely does not understand the issues or the stakes or the urgency. I mean, Mike Johnson said, well, I don't feel that this Ukraine situation is as urgent as the situation in Israel. But of course, it's every bit as urgent. And from a purely geopolitical perspective, and this is really hard to say, and we shouldn't have to choose, but the situation in Ukraine is much more important geopolitically to the United States and the West than the situation between Israel and Gaza. Hamas is not an existential threat to the Israelis. Hamas is a bad terrorist group, and they should be eliminated. But what is going to happen in that part of the world, even to the extent that it involves Iran, is limited in terms of its consequence. But if Vladimir Putin is allowed in the 10th year of his war against Ukraine to succeed because the United States flinches, doesn't provide the support to Ukraine that Ukraine needs, every other country on Russia's border is at risk. Vladimir Putin sends a message to his people and to the world that aggression pays. And all the innocents who have been murdered, who have been raped, who have been thrown into mass graves, children and women, who have suffered the same fate as those Israelis that were attacked by Hamas, except in much greater numbers in Ukraine,
right,
will not be not only avenged, but their brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers will not be protected against more of them.
Well said. Getting to this guy, Mike Johnson, this is such an important piece that you've written because you give us a bit of a history lesson. I was serious when I shared it on social media saying, share this with your kids, because it depends where your kids are learning about American history and what they're told to believe about what the founding fathers believed. The piece over the beast. Here's why Mike Johnson is more dangerous than Donald Trump. The former president only cares about himself. The new Speaker of the House actually wants to make America a Christian theocracy. At the beginning of this piece, you lay out why America's founders did not want a Christian theocracy, and you list many examples. I think kids should be forced to read this. I think parents should read this with their children, Rothkopf.
Well, you're nice to say so. I write articles every week, and I don't send many of them to my own kids, but I did send that one to my kids because I think the threat of this movement in the United States is extremely great, and people have been warning of this threat for a long time. Barry Goldwater warned of the threat in the 1960s if the preachers took over the Republican Party, and they have gradually been gaining more and more influence for a long, long time. And, you know, the premise, which Mike Johnson has advanced, that America is a Christian nation, that the principles on which this country were founded were the principles of the Bible, is just nonsense. The reality is that the United States, many of people who came to the United States originally, before it was the United States, were escaping religious persecution. And many of those people had seen the consequences of hundreds of years of wars in Europe between Catholics and Protestants and different denominations of Protestantism. And they saw the absolute brutality, much of which we've forgotten. And so they said, no, we don't want to do that.
Right.
And they were explicit.
Yes.
They were explicit. The word God does not appear in the Constitution. Washington and Jefferson and Franklin and Madison and these people, they were deists. Deists are people who believe that God created the universe and then left it to us. Jefferson had a version of the Bible in which he'd cut out all the parts that were the sort of religious magic that he didn't believe in, and wrote in a letter to Adams when they were both older men that he hoped at some point in the future that people would look at these tales from the Bible like they look at Aesop's fables.
Right.
And there was a treaty that Washington approved and John Adams ultimately signed that the United States entered into, in which it explicitly said the United States of America is not a Christian nation. But none of these facts matter. And of course they don't matter to a guy like Johnson, who is on the radical fringe of the evangelical right, who doesn't believe in evolution, who's a creationist, who thinks the earth has only been around a few thousand years, who thinks that the answer to every question is in the Bible, who has compared being gay to bestiality, who wants to ban all abortion, who, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I think it's already becoming clear. This guy is on the fringe of the fringe, and he has been empowered because the MAGA movement is driven by the evangelical movement, right? The money and the organization of the evangelical movement. And this should scare everybody. And the article I wrote in the Beast was why this guy may be scarier than Trump, because I don't think Trump believes in anything except Trump, and these people have an ideology and they let the world color it. And with regard to Israel, their view is, you can't have the rapture unless Israel is controlled by the Jews.
Right. So important. So important.
And so, they believe that supporting Israel is a predicate to the end times, by the way, the Netanyahu and the Israeli right are like, okay, great. Whoever supports us, we'll take it. But it's so short-sighted.
Yes.
They don't care about the Jews. And in fact, if you read anything about the rapture, it doesn't turn out so well for the Jews.
It does not. No.
And so we now have a guy who is letting biblical fantasies drive his policymaking. And I think we're going to discover, this guy was kind of obscure, and, now we're starting to see, he got some money that was funneled to him by Russian donors. And, he had a podcast with his wife, who is a licensed pastoral counselor, in which they talked about the biblical foundations of everything under the sun. And, he has participated in meetings with some of the big donors on the rights trying to advance these views. And don't take it, and this is the final thing I'll say, don't take it in and of itself like this funny looking little guy is a problem. He's part of a movement.
Yeah.
And some of the people in that movement are now on the Supreme Court. And some of the people in that movement are high up in the Republican Party. Mike Pompeo is somebody else who is in this dominionist movement that believes that God wants Christians to run the country.
That is, to me, the most important point, is that we understand who the players are and what they believe. You write, the term Christofascism may seem inflammatory. It is not. It's intended to provide the most accurate possible definition of what Mike Johnson and those in his movement wish to achieve. Like other fascists, they seek to impose by whatever means necessary their views on the whole of society, even if that means undoing established laws and eliminating accepted freedoms, which, like for me, are ass play. Don't take that from me. Don't come into my house and tell me what I can or cannot do in my bedroom. And so I think that people are going to reject these rights that we've won. Christofascists, you write, do so in the name of advancing their Christian ideology, asserting that all in society must be guided by their views and values, whether they adhere to them or not. Mike Pompeo, Mike Pence, Samuel Alito, you could argue others on the Supreme Court and plenty of other courts, and the Trump administration outsourced, when they were hiring, a kind of litmus test for a lot of these types so that they believed in this. You saw Mike Flynn, his former first national security advisor. I mean, it's not just a few of these Christofascists in the federal government and running state governments as well.
Well, and look at the consequence. 70, 80, 90% of the American people believe that women should have the right to choose whether or not they're going to carry a child to term.
Or just reproductive rights, healthcare in general.
But what I'm getting at is that it's not the majority of Americans believe in it. It's a supermajority of Americans that believe in it.
Right.
And that right has been taken away from everybody. Well, how? By this small group of people who have seized power. They've seized, leverage within our government. And what is their next step? They want to ban abortion nationally. He has said it. Mike Johnson has said it. Mike Pence has said it.
He's written 3 bills, co-sponsored 3 national abortion bills, Mike Johnson.
Right. And, where will that go next? Well, he doesn't believe that same-sex couples should be allowed to marry, because he compares this, what he calls deviancy, to bestiality. He calls it perversion.
I read that he doesn't want straight couples to be able to be divorced. Seriously.
He doesn't. And so what is this? He has a very, very narrow view of what acceptable behavior is.
Yeah.
And he believes that it is the role of government to impose his view on everybody else. And, fortunately, there are people like you with a microphone who can stand up, as you just did, on behalf of ass play.
Thank you.
And we see you as a champion of human rights in that regard.
Well, there's a whole bunch of people that aren't political, but when they find out that they're coming for your taint and perineum ticklers, I mean, it is a weird thing. It's funny, but it's also...
Isn't it pronounced perineum?
Well, I'm part of the organization that is promoting this, so I think
I see. Yeah. Okay. No.
I can joke.
Who might argue with an expert?
I don't know, but you should come to our meetings because it will transform your life, sir. But the point is, how can you possibly police my sexuality in my home and say that a certain sexual act, sodomy, etc.
This is their point, and this is why it's Christofascism.
Right.
They seek to take away your rights and impose their rights by force if it is necessary. It is a threat to everything you might believe that they don't believe in. And if you think it stops at abortion, or it stops at gay marriage, or it stops at, divorce, or what, it doesn't. It's every aspect of life. And this is the nightmare of the founders, the nightmare. They did not want this to become a theocracy. And it's so ironic that we've spent the past few years fighting religious extremists in the Middle East, Taliban, the mullahs in Iran, when in fact, we have this budding movement of religious extremists in the United States who are gaining momentum.
We were attacked by 15 hijackers who were religious extremists, and they killed thousands of people that day. And I mean, I don't think it's in any way an abstract comparison.
It's not. It's an absolutely apt comparison. I would say people will look back on 9/11 and say America reacted to 9/11 in almost every possible wrong way.
Yes, except for probably what I think people don't realize is where we filled the holes and the gaps when it came to national security. I think people often think that the way that we can get back or prevent a future attack is to go kill all of the enemy, which has always been preposterous because it's an idea. You got to kill the idea. And that's a very, very difficult thing to do, if ever. And so what you do is you create new precautions, security precautions, and we can argue about our rights and where they might be infringed based on things that the NSA may be doing. But I think they probably thwart a lot of other attacks and have new ways to defend against attacks. So should Israel. I mean, but
there are a lot of ways to do this. And I would say two things on that. One,
thank you.
The point that you make about, fighting insurgents, the lead fighter of insurgents during much of our war in the Gulf was a general named Stan McChrystal. And Stan McChrystal came to the conclusion that for every civilian you kill, you create 10 new insurgents.
Yeah. But it wasn't his. I mean, David Kilcullen, I think also a lot of people thought that it wasn't just McChrystal, right?
No, it's not. But what I'm saying is this is the lesson.
Yeah.
And this is, if Israel thinks that they're going to eliminate Hamas, and it's perfectly okay to kill thousands of civilians en route to doing so,
right,
they're making a big mistake, not just because tactically that's probably not the right way to do it, but because they're going to create more opposition. There's a very good column by my friend Tom Friedman, who takes a lot of shit from a lot of people.
Yes.
But who understands these issues, particularly related to the Middle East, as well or better than any commentator that's out there.
He lost a lot of credibility over the Iraq War.
He did, but he was not in. He was in the majority when he made the assertions that he made, and I think he has grappled with that. But in this particular case, in this column, which is something to the effect of Israel should not get lost in the Hamas's tunnels, it's just his most recent column. He points out that after India was attacked by Pakistan, that the Prime Minister of India decided not to publicly go after Pakistan because it would empower the military in Pakistan, and that he would achieve better results going after the perpetrators of the crimes covertly and using other targeted diplomatic, political, financial, and other means to achieve his goal. And in so doing, he would not make the mistake of committing crimes that overshadowed the crime that so outraged him. And it was a brilliant point, extremely well made. And I really hope that people in Israel and in the United States take it to heart.
Treating these things more like police actions, investigation work, and it's not.
I worked in the government a long time ago, and I had a boss who was an interesting guy. I was deputy undersecretary of commerce, and then later I was acting undersecretary of commerce, and I reported up to a guy named Ron Brown, who was the secretary of commerce, and he was the former head of the Democratic Party, and he talked about speeches where people would bang the table.
Mm-hmm.
And he would say, this is a feel-good speech, but it doesn't advance your goals. You know, and this is what happens in the wake of these things. People, they seek the feel-good response. They seek the maximum response. They are fueled by bloodlust, but they're not stopping to say, what is it we're trying to achieve here?
Right. George Bush with the bullhorn on the pile of rubble saying soon the people who did this are going to hear from us. That was in essence okay if it was the people that did this, but instead we did
overkill. We did America. Yeah. We did unilateralism. Yeah. We did exactly what Osama bin Laden wanted us to do.
Exactly, yeah.
And knew what we would do. And that is why today, 22 years after that occurred, there are more terrorists in the Middle East and in North Africa than there were on September 11th, 2001. And I think, the important thing is not, should Hamas be there? No. Should the people who committed these crimes be out and about? No. Will I shed a tear if they die? No. Should the hostages be released? Of course the hostages should be released. But once you sort of check those boxes, then the question becomes, what are you going to do next? How are you going to achieve peace? What's going to replace Hamas? Who's going to rebuild Gaza? How are you going to establish some kind of security regime there that can ultimately transition into some kind of enduring political entity? How does that connect to the West Bank? Et cetera, et cetera. And frankly, I hear nothing that suggests those questions have been asked, much less answered.
I just want to ask you quickly what you think of Mike Johnson becoming Speaker of the House. In districts like mine, I've got, a Republican now, congressman just north of New York, is Mike Lawler. And in some of these districts where it's a Biden district and Republicans won, thus throwing the power of the House to Republicans, I wonder what your analysis, if it's too early, if it matters, of how we hang that around Mike Lawler. I've been trying to say this, our Congressman Mike Lawler voted for this Christo-fascist extremists, which does not represent our views here in our district. I wonder if you think it'll matter come next year that Mike Lawler and those others voted for this guy, if we can connect it, if it matters.
It will matter, and I think it'll matter in the most important area possible, which is turnout. I think it matters to women. I think it matters to young people. I think it matters to LGBTQ people. I think it matters to all these communities who are being disenfranchised. Yeah. It should matter to everybody, because Mike Lawler also promoted the big lie, sought to undermine our democracy. And I think we should be, let's just think about what's going to happen here. What if there's an election in 2024 and it's real close?
Yeah.
If Mike Lawler is still the Speaker of the House,
Mike Johnson,
January 6th, 2025, he's for sure going to fiddle the results or punt or do something, because he's already told us he's going to do that. And I think the House takes office a little before that. And so if the control of the House changes before then, it can actually have the result of preserving democracy.
Right.
New York State Democrats made a terrible mistake in the last congressional round of not focusing on these 5 districts that flipped. And with it went the Congress. And so, I think the single best hopes for reclaiming the House of Representatives rest in district like yours. But people have got to organize and be out there, and they've got to make sure that everybody understands the stakes.
We took back our Democratic Party here locally as a result of that. We'll take the credit for it. It's what we did and what we're doing, and that's what we got to keep doing. Everybody else has to do it too. Rothkopf, always the greatest. Thank you very much.
Always enjoyed, Pete. Good luck.
There he goes, David Rothkopf, everybody. Yeah, thank you very much for listening to today's special program. I don't know why I just said it was special. I don't know. Wanted to make it seem like that, but it's really no different than yesterday's program or the day before in terms of the format. But it's all special to me. I put a lot into each episodes, so I appreciate you taking them in, listening to them, and all of you listening all the way to the end. You bumblebees is what I call you. You are the best. I think I'll probably take tomorrow off. Thanks for all your birthday wishes, ideas, gifts, jokes. All of it means a lot to me, and I will talk to you tomorrow. John Carroll does the music for the show, and we are so grateful for it. Check him out, johncarroll.org. You can support him over there. You can buy this song if you haven't already. Check it out. Do it. Bye-bye.
Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know us right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it than now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up. People got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on.